Okay, so let me walk you through getting all of this set up here. We're looking at the settings page in the Enterprise Manager, and we need to make sure BBJ Authentication is enabled and SAML is enabled. And all of these settings here, you shouldn't have to make any changes at all in order to make it work with the samltest.id site. It'll just, all those default settings are good. One of the things that we are going to be looking at here is this particular URL, this metadata URL here for the service provider entity ID. That's identifying BBJ. So we want to copy that URL, and we're going to use that in just a moment. So, but before we do that, let me jump over to groups. So with groups, we need to add a new security group, and this is based on the available roles that will be coming from our identity provider when different users are identified. So in the case of samltest.id, we have manager and for some reason it keeps pausing my video when I'm typing certain things. I don't know why. But in any case, we need to create a group named one of the roles that the administrative users are going to have when they are identified from the identity provider. So you'll see that here in a moment. So the role coming in is going to be named manager at samltest.id. So we want to add that. So we're creating a group here in BBJ with that role name. And then we want to assign all the permissions to it, obviously, because we want them to be able to use the Enterprise Manager and use all the functionality. So now we've told it any user who comes in who has the role manager at samltest.id will get all of these permissions because they'll be considered a member of this group. Okay, so if you remember, now we have that metadata URL here that we copied. And when we come over to the SAMLtest site, let me come back to the main page here. If you go to samltest.id, this is your main page here. The first thing we have to do is upload metadata, because what that's going to do is identify us to the SAMLtest site so it knows how to talk to us. In the case of a real live configuration, then there would be some other way of doing this with whatever tool, with whatever system you're using. You might paste in a URL, you might drop a file in a location or something. But in any case, it's going to use this metadata. So we're going to click on upload metadata here. And if we had an external Jetty, or if our Jetty was available externally, we could just paste in that metadata URL here, and then SAMLtest could go out and find it. But since it's not available externally, we're going to have to choose a file and upload it. And the way that you can do that is just go into a browser window and paste that URL in there, and then load it, and you'll see it pulls up the XML, and then just save that as an XML file, and then that's the XML file that we'll upload here to samltest.id to identify us. And then you'll get something like this where it says it was successful. You'll see some information down below which you can just sort of ignore. But now samltest.id is set up to talk to our setup here. So once you've done that, then you are ready to log in. So it really is pretty quick and easy to get set up like that. So then you'll come over back to the Enterprise Manager here, and when you refresh that, as you see here, you have the two different options. So now we're here at the Enterprise Manager sign-in page, and as you can see, we can sign in with username and password if we want to, and that'll give us the standard username password dialog, or we can sign in with our identity provider. So we're going to go ahead and do it with this one, sign in there, and you'll see here now it takes us to the SAMLtest.id login page. So we're actually signing in with them. They're identifying who we are, and then it's going to pass that information back to BBJ. So we're going to type in this Rick guy here. As you see, it's got usernames and passwords down below for testing. Rick happens to be a manager, so we're going to use Rick, and we're going to do that, and we're going to click. I'm going to click this just to clear out some stuff. Click on Login. And what you're going to see here is SAMLtest.id goes ahead and pops up some general information for us just so we can kind of see what this user is going to look like coming in. We see his name's Rick Sanchez, email address and so forth. His username here. And then we also see this role. So this is that role that I was talking about there, and that's a standard setting. So the role is manager at SAML test ID. And so anybody that has that role, since we added that as a group in BBJ, will then be associated with that group. And we're going to go ahead and accept here. And now it takes us back, as you see, it redirected us back to our Enterprise Manager login page. Now you may be saying, well, how did it redirect from the website back to my Jetty server when my Jetty server isn't visible externally? The cool thing with the way that SAML works is it's done inside the browser itself. It's the redirections and the passing of information is done through JavaScript in the browser as opposed to server-to-server communication at that point. So what we're able to do is the browser is able to send us the SAML test ID. SAML test ID is able to tell our browser to go back to the BBJ login URL, and then it's able to pass in our user identification information. And so it's done that here. And if you'll notice, if I pull this up, that my username is Rick. So I'm signed in as that Rick guy, and so you can see there, and because I'm part of that group, it let me sign in, and so now I'm actually signed in to BBJ as that user, and now anytime that I go back into the Enterprise Manager, so if I go into, if I close out all these windows here, because I'm still signed in at SAML test. I'm still a valid user. It's already identified who I am. I'm in the browser. I can come in here. I can click on sign in, and I'm in. So I can refresh my browser, and I don't have to re-log in again as you would normally if you were using user password authentication. And so you can see there it's a nice option. So as long as I'm signed in at SAML test, or whatever my identity provider is, then it's going to identify me whenever I try and go to the BBJ Enterprise Manager. So of course, if I want to log out, I don't have the logout mechanism. Like I don't have a shortcut in the Enterprise Manager to do that, because typically you're not going to want to log out of your enterprise login from the Enterprise Manager itself. You would have another mechanism for logging out of your enterprise identity provider. And so, but I have put in a quick and easy URL here that you can do. So just at the end of bbj/em, just do logout. And what that will do is that will go ahead and log you out of SAML test ID. That way you can do testing like this, where you're going and doing sign in again, so that you can do some testing anyway. So I just made that real simple because SAML test ID doesn't give you a logout mechanism. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, just let me know.